Hey folks, Zach Osterman here. I'm Insider Indianapolis Star, Mike Niziolek, Bloomington Herald Times. Talking to you about number 19, Indiana 27, Old Dominion 14. Mike, I would say a bit of a subdued opener for Indiana today. Kurt Signetti, I think his overarching message was not going to overreact. Better to be 1-0 than the other way around. Clearly not satisfied with what Indiana put on the field. Probably felt a little bit vindicated for all the warnings, that all the warning bells he was sort of ringing over Old Dominion and Sun Belt opponents in week one. I thought Fernando Mendoza directly referenced some of the returners from last year mentioning the FIU game a year ago. And the score's a little different. I suspect, though, of course, I am not positive that ODU will wind up better than Florida International was a year ago. But I just thought you saw some of the same, the rustiness, the sort of stunted offensive rhythm, a lot of good punctuated by glaring moments of bad, essentially.
Well, they trailed this game. They didn't trail for the first 9 weeks last year, or through the first 8 weeks until week 9, and that was one of Signetti's favorite stats to cite when he talked about his team. Won't get to do that anymore. 11 seconds was how many that they didn't trail this year. I think it was surprising, just because last year they had so much transition in terms of what the roster looked like. You got guys jumping up a little, getting accommodated to the power four, all those new faces. This year, I feel like you had more cornerstones on the roster. So even though like a guy like Fernando Mendoza is new, your running back room is new, 3 returners up front, Pat Coogan's, EJ Williams, all those other guys that didn't start last year, a lot of them were 6th-year seniors. This wasn't a team that was working in freshmen or sophomores even. This was a team that had 3 All-Americans on defense. So when you see such a glaring miscue at the start, I think it's jarring. And then at the end, too, to kind of cap off and I feel like overshadow what was a fantastic third quarter by the defense.
Yeah.
But, look, when you're going to play like 5 or 6 running quarterbacks the rest of the year and you give 2 75-yard runs up, equaling the total all last year, that's a concern. And the offense, I don't think Kurt Signetti ever kind of pumped the brakes on, he never qualified Fernando as being like a top pick guy yet, but he, being has experience and not, and I think more coming out with a better performance than he did today because he looked out of sync. He looked uncomfortable at times, even though I don't think the protection was terrible. It just was a surprising. It was, you mentioned it. Yes, it compared to last year, but I think these teams are different, and that's why maybe a little more concerning, just based on the fact that, man, you thought this would be a more fully formed product just because of what they brought back.
I guess let's just go phase by phase. Offensively, honestly, like I would be less worried about Mendoza and more worried about the red zone stuff. And the fact that, Indiana ran the ball well in long stretches today. Old Dominion was playing 2 high safeties. They were hell bent on not getting beat deep. Like that seemed to inform basically everything they were doing defensively, was just, when you're not going to get us over the top. And Indiana almost did a couple times. Did once with Omar Cooper. Cooper should have had a second. Brett really should have had a touchdown. Maybe that might have been the best ball Mendoza threw all day. Just kind of like floated like a 55-yard pass, and Cooper kind of had to adjust for it, but he ran underneath it and just took his eyes off it at the last possible second. But Indiana's superpower last year offensively was that Hoosiers just finished drives. They were first in the country in red zone scores. They were first in red zone touchdowns. They were second in percentage of red zone opportunities that ended in touchdowns. Today, I think, what is it, 6 garbage or non-garbage time, because I think they got into the red zone there on that last drive, but that doesn't really count. 6 non-garbage time red zone appearances or red zone opportunities. All of those got inside the 10-yard line. I think multiple got inside the 5-yard line. They scored 2 touchdowns, kicked 2 field goals, and turned it over on downs twice. And, we talk so much about how the offensive line's growth needed to be, the way that we believed the offensive line had improved and grown from last season needed to be real for this team to go up to another level from where it was. To be struggling to move in short yardage, and they had some other kind of in between the 20s short yardage issues as well.
Yeah.
To be able to not get the push and get the movement they needed in those situations. I recognize it's a different stable of running backs, maybe a different style, with some of these guys. but that to me is where, I suspect Kurt Cignetti will feel like by the time it matters, Indiana's going to have Fernando Mendoza in a pretty good rhythm. I think he's going to look at those red zone opportunities. He even said after he said, I didn't feel good about our red zone plan. I think he was kind of suggesting maybe that he didn't like what he saw in, that phase of preparation during the week, and that he was worried it would carry over, and it did. That's where I think maybe if we're talking like sort of bullet points, I'm betting that's top of the list for offensive adjustments and improvements this week.
Well, yeah, and I mentioned it just in terms of, I think Justin Lawson and Tyson Lawton combined for 20 touchdowns in the red zone. All 12 of Tyson Lawton's touchdowns were in the red zone. So, I mean, like you can see the volume. They had 55 total touchdowns in the red zone. So you can see the volume, how much they leaned on those backs, and how successful they were. You mentioned the offensive line, but some of that, there was a second effort. Roman Hembia had on one of the 1 yard carries from the 1 yard, and he's got to be able to get that across and extend it.
They also, like when you mentioned Lawton, like they bounced him out a lot last year.
Yeah.
Everything was between the tackles inside the 5, which maybe is,
it was the exception of Mendoza's run.
Yeah, but that maybe that's a little bit of being vanilla. I think you could definitely say that in the past game. Maybe it is. I don't know. But yeah, no, I mean it.
No, it's like you said. I thought that was a very interesting comment from him. That he's like, I was worried during the week about this, and so obviously they'll go back to the drawing board there. But in terms of taking ownership too, not just throwing it on the players, he said, "Look, we'll see execution here, I'm sure." But he said the plan first.
Yeah.
You mentioned Mendoza. EJ Williams is basically who threw exclusively to in the first half. Things opened up from there. Elijah Surratt, I think, finished the game with 3 catches for 44 yards. Cooper had one big one. He made up for the drop with a 46-yard contested catch. You mentioned kind of, we talked about, man, are they just withholding stuff to really not show anything? Or try to get to that Illinois game without kind of, revealing too much. What do you make of, and a lot of the early stuff, especially through like 2.5 quarters, was just like out routes to the sideline, very simple throws. What do you make of Mendoza's day?
Yeah, I thought, I mean, so I mentioned this to you. Curtis Rourke, I think people kind of forget, he's 15-24 for 180 yards and 1 touchdown, and got sacked twice in that FIU game. I think Mendoza, he's probably a little bit better than Mendoza. But Mendoza was 18 of 31 for 193 yards with a rushing touchdown. So like, we're sort of splitting hairs on like who had the better first game as a Hoosier. It's hard in games like this. I think it's always a little bit of both. And I think what feels like maybe a feature of modern college football, when you talk about some of the continuity, but listen, there's still a fair bit of roster turnover. We talked about, they got a hit on a bunch of transfers again, new quarterback, new starting running back, and so forth. I think it's always kind of hard when you're going out there knowing, okay, we're going to stay kind of as base as possible in a lot of these situations. We're going to, it's just going to be a lot of really basic stuff that maybe we'll build on some of it going forward, but this is not meant to be what it looks like when the opponent is really difficult. The problem is that can kind of put you in a weird place mentally.
Yeah.
And that like you can sort of feel like, oh, am I meant to be going hard, but not too hard? Like, are we, am I too, like, there were a couple times where there were a couple pre-snap moments when I thought, if this is Illinois, I bet Mendoza checks out of this.
Yeah.
Like ODU showed a blitz and it was 3rd and 1, and Indiana still just kind of ran it into the teeth.
In the red zone, that was before.
There were moments when you felt like Indiana was keeping the handbrake on. And again, the problem is sometimes you do that, and I know why you want to do it. And listen, at the end of the day, Indiana wins the game, and they win it by 2 scores. And Kurt Cignetti probably gets some fuel that he'd like to have for getting his team's attention and really sort of pushing them through these next couple of weeks to get ready for Illinois. And if we're having these same conversations after Kennesaw State, yeah, then more of the alarm bells are going off. But it is, I think, sometimes hard when you're sort of telling yourself, we're going to go, we're going to go this far today, but no farther, to sort of figure out exactly how far to open the throttle. And I thought offensively, Indiana, like Mendoza epitomized this, but I don't think he was alone in it.
Right.
Indiana just looked like a team that wasn't comfortable trying to like
thread that needle,
basically be its best, but only to a point. And that's kind of a weird
I thought
feel.
The most interesting response that we got out of it was that Cignetti said Mendoza, what they've been mainly working on him with is speeding up his process, speeding up his reads and progression, and that is something that he's struggled with at times. That he gets when he gets I don't know caught up, he can get out of rhythm, and then that kind of snowballs, and that they've got to figure that out a little bit. And Mendoza was sort of open and honest that said, yeah, he didn't really do a good job of that today at all, and maybe he actually described himself as lackadaisical, and so. You want to see that get fixed. And, maybe that's a symptom too of he didn't have to make many reads at Cal because he was under duress so much. Like, what reads can you make? You only get one and done. And you
Yeah, a lot of one.
and so, like, now you got to get used to the idea of like, look, I can go to my third option.
Mhm.
Or I could even go back to my first option after checking down and seeing those other guys. Like, maybe you didn't have that. Like, look, when you sacked 40 times, I'd imagine your time to throw is not very good. So that'll be something to watch kind of going forward here, especially kind of these next 2 weeks are think in theory, although Kennesaw State pushed I think a bad Wake team. You think you'll get some chances to sort of kind of get in a rhythm a little bit and try to go into Illinois with a little bit more momentum, because I don't think you really had that today. You're not really feeling good about look, yeah, you put up 500 yards, but I mean, it was an uneven performance. I think
No, it
you
definitely.
absolutely.
And I mean, listen, that spreads to the defense too, where on the one hand, you have these two huge busts you talk about, the 75-yard run on the first play of the game, 78-yard run. That actually, in a weird way, I actually thought, and we'd have to go back and look at it to be sure. I actually thought the 78-yard run was less of a bust and more of Joseph making a play, because if you watch it in real
I
time,
don't know what the reads were supposed to be like.
sure, but if you watch it in real time, he's given the ball up,
Yeah.
and he sees something flow in the defense, and he pulls it back, and like the path he takes out of the pocket tells me that was not the design. He just saw an opening,
But
and he's a really good dual threat quarterback.
You can't bite all the way down.
No, definitely. I understand that. The flip side is Old Dominion didn't take a snap in plus territory today.
Yeah.
Like that's a funny little performance to try. Like, Indiana allowed 314 yards of total offense, including 218 on the ground, and 153 of those came on 2 snaps. Which,
And the game
you
was
don't
never really in doubt in the second half.
no, like, you don't get
absolved
absolved of the 2 snaps, but you're also allowed to sort of feel good about a sack and 3 quarterback hurries. Again, the Old Dominion lined up over the 50 one time, committed a false start penalty, backed up, and never got a. We're back! Hooray!
Maybe.
I think. Oh,
But
nope. We're back. There we go. All right. I don't know how that happened. This is gonna be a great podcast. No, I like it. Again, it's a little bit of like, I don't want to say best of both worlds, but like, if you're Bryant Haynes, you get to come out of that and you get to sort of say like, Elijah Hardy, you had a good day. I know he was probably involved in the busts,
Yeah.
but I thought he also had some really good open field sort of
Yeah.
plays. He had an important tip pass.
Yeah.
You get to say like, Devin Boykin, you had a good day.
Yeah.
You made an important play. Amari Farrell, Lewis Moore, whatever.
They
Like,
they had 3 interceptions.
you get to feel good about the performance while still there being that little carrot that you're still kind of dangling out there to say, but we can't do this when it matters. Can't do it when we see an old friend next week who Indiana will know is very dangerous in the open field, Dexter Williams, and certainly can't do it in Big Ten play. And so it's sort of, I don't know, it feels like not a coach's dream, but like it feels like for week 1, I don't know. I suspect Indiana might have traded some style points for the opportunity to come out of this with with stuff to push their team on.
I don't know, when you have such big expectations and style points matter at the end of the year. If you want to be in a playoff race, you're going to look at this performance. And if ODU is not very good,
That is what will color this. Like if ODU goes,
and it's like, yeah, like that's rosy glasses and all that, but I mean that's how the season's been framed, not
Yeah.
by us. It's been like all these players that came back said we have playoff expectations, and so if that's the case, a game like this is not going to be a best case scenario. It's not, like, yeah, you get the tape and you learn from it, and maybe that helps them kind of go on from here. I just think that, I mean, that first quarter, especially, I asked kind of, I thought, Kurtz is going to talk for the last couple of weeks about urgency. Did you feel like they had that in the first quarter? Because that first quarter was kind of a disaster, other than the punt return in the last final few seconds. That on both sides of the, offense and defense wise, that first quarter was pretty rough.
Yeah. No, I mean if we're talking defense specifically, I mean, I suspect
because on the second drive he broke a couple. He had a couple two first downs, broke a couple tackles. They didn't settle down until after that. And then yes, they were locked down. And I mean, I think I wrote about the third quarter. I think they allowed 21 yards total, negative rushing yards, and like that's the defense you kind of thought they would be. And yeah, there's going to be mistakes, but those kind of mistakes, and when those kind of mistakes are what beat you against Notre Dame, because you allowed that big run, was a quarterback obviously, but that was like literally what happened. Like the closing image of last year was the opening image of this one. And I don't know how you can say, I get all your points in saying like, yeah, the coaches are going to be able to like use this and hammer home and get that message across, but at the same time, maybe you could have it done other ways when you win by 30 and don't have to sort of.
Sure. The thing is, I don't think the distance between framing it that way and framing it a very different way is very far. And that is if Omar Cooper doesn't drop that pass and Indiana has one less bad fit, it's a 34-7 win.
Like, yes, one of the coaches I covered used to say, like, well, if you took away those 3 runs that were 80 yards, this would have been a great game.
Sure.
But you can't really do that.
Well, no, I understand that. But my point is,
still going 16-0.
Which team was closer to its ideal performance today? By some distance, Indiana.
Well,
Indiana still has 3 turnovers forced, 500 total yards of offense.
But ODU could say, well, we took a top 20 team and we were within striking distance-ish.
I wouldn't say ish.
Ish.
They got one break late in the fourth quarter, and then Indiana killed the game.
Either way, I think this was closer than you wanted it to if you're an IU fan, especially.
As a fan, definitely.
And I think for the coaches too, I think there were too many, because I think that was what when I think Signe was answered a followed up like, how do you think about this game? And he said like, we made too many mistakes, flat out, like the simple end of sentence, because like you don't want like those are the things like that are easily fixable, yes, but also head scratching, because like I said, we got veterans on the team. These aren't guys that have never been in this moment before. It'd be different if you were talking about a freshman that makes a misread. It's like 6 veterans.
But if everybody gets, if so much gets turned over on a roster on an annual basis, we were talking about questions about the defensive line rotation, questions in the secondary, a quarterback who's experienced, but again, like Curtis Rourke a year ago, who winds up having far better games against better teams than FIU.
My counterpoint would be like a lot of the mistakes too were not those players. Like Omar Cooper was not that player. He dropped the pass. And then, the read, a lot of the guys that were on the team misread that team, last year, the first one especially. I didn't get as good of a look at the second one. I was saying, I think we're maybe splitting hairs, but the idea of like.
I think what I'm saying is that like, I think we are living on opposite sides of the line a little bit on evaluating this game. I think the point I'm trying to make is that we're a lot closer to each other than we think, though. I just
think if you're 10-2 and you're asking the playoff committee to evaluate your roster or your schedule, and they see this game in Old Dominion, what if Old Dominion, craps out and goes 3-9 or 4-8?
Can't use that language on YouTube.
They're stinky.
Like the gooey mac and cheese.
Mac and cheese downstairs. Like if they're 4-8 and you say, man, that could cost us, is basically my saying. And when you have these kind of expectations,
I think if
you don't get a mulligan.
I think if the committee has to drill all the way down to week 1 against Old Dominion, then Indiana probably isn't going to have that robust of a case to begin with.
Maybe, but no, because if you're 10-2, I don't know. Those are what it'll come down to. It'll come down to the margins.
I think the margins are still going to be found in games much more meaningful than this one.
We'll see. Were you surprised that they played? That was that uneven. I don't know. It poorly sounds like the wrong word. It was I don't know.
It was very rusty. I just thought it was very
uneven
rusty.
is the word.
Yeah.
Yeah.
I think the last thing I would say, and this is like the tease of my insider angles, like the difference to I've seen plenty of underwhelming week ones
Yeah.
from IU football in the past, not like up to and including last season when they win by 10 more points than this, but we all come away being like, still wasn't great, got a lot to improve on. Because
more the second half that they just didn't blow the doors off the thing.
Sure, I get that, but like again, it's your point about if only for that second half. Like the game was what it was. This game was what it was. The difference is, for the first time in a very long time, Indiana has a head coach with a track record for fixing it.
Yeah.
And also a head coach who I think the vast majority of fans will trust to fix it. I've seen anecdotally some reaction on social media like, oh, I hoped we would be better, whatever. But I suspect the majority of fans will walk away saying that wasn't great, but the guy in the head chair will get it fixed.
I don't think you lose confidence because of the way you played and
No.
in the team.
Yeah.
But I do think it's fair to say for fans to say we expected a little better based on what we had, we've built here over the last 24 months, 18 months.
And it also gets reframed again in 7 days because Indiana reframes that FIU game by coming out and just
making no mistakes,
historically burying Western Illinois. If Indiana comes out next week against Kennesaw State and
because Indiana State doesn't count, you got to do it against.
If Indiana comes out against Kennesaw State and wins 44-0, then we're allowed to say, okay, they needed that quote unquote preseason game to get it out of their system. We'll leave it there for now. But he's Mike Niziolek. I'm Zach Osterman for the Indianapolis Star. We're still figuring this out, kind of on the phone. Maybe we'll go back to the computer.
Didn't give that away.
Yeah. That was weird. Hopefully we don't have that happen again anytime soon.
Yeah.
For the Herald Times, the Indianapolis Star, this has been Mind Your Banners. Thank you so much for watching. We'll talk to you soon.